All right. Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of CrossHack. My name is Dan Mangum, and I'll be your host this evening. This is kind of an impromptu stream that we're doing off the announcement of the new GKE Autopilot feature. So we want to be able to add support for this to Crossplane's provider GCP so that folks can spin up GK clusters with autopilot support enabled. So we're going to look at doing that and maybe even look at running Crossplane, which runs in Kubernetes, on GKE as well. So we'll just be exploring that a little bit tonight. We'll probably only go for about an hour tonight since it is a later stream, and we're just hopping on to have some fun and hack around on this. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the chat. And if anyone is watching, you're welcome to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining from. Drop any questions as we go along or thoughts or comments. And I'll make sure to circle back to that. It looks like we do have one person in the chat, so welcome. And any others who hop in, definitely feel free to introduce yourself. So if you didn't see the announcement today, I pulled it up here on the screen. And essentially what GKE has done is allowed you to run clusters with pricing per pod, or per usage, I guess would be a better characterization of it. And I haven't looked into it too deeply yet, but I did take a brief scan of this, and this is kind of seen as sort of the next iteration of their Kubernetes offering here. And you can still run in the traditional mode. I think they call it standard. We'll look at the docs in a moment. But then they're offering this new autopilot mode, which basically says, GKE, please run this Kubernetes cluster for me and scale it appropriately. And you can set limits and do all that sort of thing. And I was taking a look around earlier at the GKE console, and it wasn't available in the UI yet, but they said it's rolling out. You could actually get to the UI by creating an autopilot cluster via the CLI and then duplicating it, funny enough. But anyway, this basically makes it a lot easier to run a Kubernetes cluster and, theoretically makes it a lot better from a pricing perspective as well. So we definitely want to support this in Crossplane, of course. And also, just a note, it looks like you can check it out on this week's episode of the Kubernetes podcast if folks want to give that a listen. But already in Crossplane's provider GCP here, we have support for GK clusters, of course, because it's a very common resource that folks want to spin up. So let's take a look at that. All right, GKE. And you can see it's a pretty large resource here. And a lot of different things you can specify. You can actually do it pretty minimally with just a few fields here. But yeah, what we basically want to do is update the version of the provider SDK that we're using to provision this GKE cluster to include the new field that enables autopilot. And we'll have to see exactly what that looks like. And the quickest way to do that is just to go ahead and look at the docs. And I actually took a peek at it earlier today. Let's see, our go.mod. This is the package that we're using for GKE, at least. I believe some of the other ones have a dedicated package. But we can hop over here and let's look at the directories. And it should be in container. And we're using the V1 Beta 1. If anyone here has actually context around how these APIs work, feel free to drop it in the chat. My understanding is that V1 Beta 1 is going to have the beta features for GKE, so you get them faster, so you can support them faster. And then V1 is just going to be the GA stuff. And so we're actually using V1 Beta 1 for this GKE cluster implementation. And as you'll see here, we had this module pinned because some fields were dropped from that. I'm assuming it's okay for us to drop those fields because they're probably ineffectual right now for anyone who's using them. But we'll take a look at what happens when we actually update to a newer version of the SDK. All right, so the main type here is the cluster, and it has a bunch of nested types, which result in all of these different types here. And let's take a look and see if it's updated. This is probably, so this is the latest tag, so it's probably not going to be here. But I noticed earlier when looking through the repo that their most recent generation from the API types did have it. So we're not going to see it here. So let me hop back a couple levels. Let's go up here and just go to the repo. So all these clients are just generated. And you can see that there was a PR that generated this automatically 12 hours ago. And I took a peek in here at the container package. And we'll just stick with v1 beta 1 for now. And this is a very large file. So you'll see this was one of the files that was modified 12 hours ago. So I actually just look at this commit. Hopefully it won't be too big in terms of the number of files it touches. Although it looks like it is fairly large. So let's actually just hop back one. And GitHub is struggling with this. Autopilot. There we go. So we have this new autopilot struck in here that just has the enabled field. And you'll see it's the official product name of what is previously known as Auto GKE. And so I think, at least from what I could tell from the documentation, that we should be able to create a cluster with just the location and autopilot enabled, because we're essentially saying, defer settings to either the defaults, which is going to happen for some of the kind of like scaling configuration, or, we're actually providing them directly. So we really just need to add this autopilot type. And so I'm going to hop over and do that. So first of all, like I said, we had this pinned previously in a previous release because we didn't want to bump the version because it was going to drop some fields, but we're going to go ahead and do that today because we want to add support for it. And let me get a copy of what that package name was again. And we're going to have to use the latest from master because there hasn't been a release that includes this yet. And while we're here, looks like we have Jonathan in the chat. I apologize if I didn't pronounce your name correctly. Please feel free to drop in the pronunciation guide, and I'll make sure to correct myself. Jared joining. Jared's one of the founders of the Crossplane project, joining from San Diego. We have Wagner joining. And William joining as well. And I believe William is the potentially the creator of GKE Autopilot. I think you liked the tweet earlier, which I definitely appreciate. And thanks for stopping by as well to go ahead and watch the stream. I do have a question for you, actually. When fields are dropped out of the SDK, if you're using an older version, I assume those fields are just not honored by the GCP API. They're just essentially dropped, but I could be incorrect there. So if you have any insight on that, I would love to hear it. All right, so it looks like we got the latest version here, and we can double check that. Let me go ahead and fix this up, and let's make sure we're on a branch. Yeah, I already created the autopilot branch here, and if I need to make anything bigger, definitely feel free to let me know in the chat as well. All right, so we can look at the client here where we're doing the conversion between the Kubernetes API type that GCP provides, provider-gcp provides, and the actual cluster type here. And what we want to see here, if this is able to load fast enough, let's see. Seems the editor is struggling a little bit. Come on. All right, well, we'll just go ahead and add it preemptively. So I'm going to go into our v1 beta 1 directory here. So this is where we have the support for GKE cluster. v1 alpha 1, we still have our node pool type in here, although that could actually be moved in. If you look at the GKE cluster type in the GCP API, you can actually specify node pools inline. Working with our kind of Kubernetes object model, though, it makes a lot more sense to have these as separate objects, and then we use what we call in Crossplane cross-resource references. So if you want to create a GKE cluster with a certain set of node pools, then you can actually just look, and we should be able to see here cluster ref or something like that. Yep, so here you can actually reference by name a GKE cluster object in your Kubernetes cluster, and Crossplane will take care of resolving that reference and plumbing it up into the GCP API request that goes on up. All right, so it looks like we need to add that autopilot struct here. And I am going to just do a little trick here to get this imported. Let's see, we want container cluster, and it may struggle here because it doesn't already have this aliased. All right, so let's drop that in. All right, let's see if it's gonna let us. It's still not letting us go to it. Well, that's quite annoying, but we'll give it a try anyway. One thing we could see if this works. I'm just gonna close the editor and give this another try because it's gonna be less fun if it's not working out for us. All right, go please. Let's see if this will do it this time. There we go. A little hit the restart button always does the trick. So if we go down here, we should see if it's the late enough version. Yeah, autopilot. And so I'm going to go ahead and copy over this struct. Oops. And we'll use this directly. And I also want to find, yeah, so, okay, it's near the top here because they're alphabetical. Nice. All right. And it's going to be optional. You'll see that denoted by the pointer type. And let's see, auto scaling. We'll drop it in here right between these two as well. Oops, sorry about that. We need to drop this further down here. Let's drop it down with the others. Cluster auto scaling. We'll put it here. And in the API type we expose in Kubernetes, we don't need this. Typically, I'll correct this comment here. Typically, even though this is an optional field here, typically it's been our pattern to make this required anyway. So if you provide the autopilot struct, it really doesn't work super well if you don't put anything in that. So while it's an option to be able to do that, we typically just make it required because folks typically don't provide the autopilot entry in their YAML and then just empty brackets or something like that. So we typically do require those fields, but the top level struct will not be required, of course. All right, so let's get back up here And this is what we want up at the top. So autopilot, we're going to make this optional. And all right, looks good. It's pointer type, which will let us know if it was provided or not. Okay, William says, I checked with the team. If you pass parameters for standard that autopilot doesn't support, it will error. Okay, cool. Well, let's just see if we run into that. I want to scroll down here, and these different fields that I was talking about getting dropped, one of them is this enable peering route sharing. So I'm guessing that's just no longer supported in the private cluster config. We could actually go ahead. I frequently look at these GCP GKE APIs and look at this Kubernetes Engine Api. It has some really nice documentation, actually like a little playground that you can use to try stuff out. So let's go project locations, cluster, create, and this cluster object here. Let's take a look and see if it has documentation on this enable peer sharing. Let's see if it has private cluster config. It does not. Let's see. Private endpoint might be a good one to key on. Oh, I think it's not showing the actual cluster object here. That would be why. Here we go. We'll jump over to the actual object type. And as you can see over here, you can play with this in the browser, which is really nice for sure. Private cluster config. And what's that field that was dropped? So yeah, enable peering route sharing. Yeah, so William, if you're still on, I guess my question is outside of, let's see. William says, we're just pushing the API doc update for autopilot now. Sorry. Well, I appreciate the live updates. That's pretty cool. No, but what one of my questions was for this enable peering route sharing, since it appears that's not supported anymore, if I make a request with the SDK, this older SDK, to the API, is that field basically just going to get dropped? And I'd imagine so, right, if it's not supported anymore. But didn't know for sure if that would cause an error or something like that. But for today, and we'll obviously have to get review on this PR and that sort of thing when we submit it. But we're going to go ahead and remove these fields. So actually, what was the one we dropped up here? Enable peering route sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove, let's see, tier settings. So let's drop that. And we'll need to revisit this, of course, and make sure that this wasn't re-implemented with a different field, because as we're updating, you know, there could also be plenty of new fields that are also not present. So we'll take this off too. All right. So we should see some errors here, and now they match up, which is kind of nice. Tier settings, we'll drop that off. We'll also need to update some of the unit tests for this, which we may do off stream. And tier settings. And I imagine that was called somewhere. Yeah, so up at the top, we have our generate tier settings. So the other thing we want to do is create a generate autopilot. So we'll do something similar to these. I'll just copy this one over. Generate autopilot. All right. And autopilot from autopilot. So basically we're going to take in this autopilot type and update the cluster with it. So cluster authenticator groups config, let's see, if n does not equal nil, so right, if we provided autopilot, and if the cluster autopilot, then we're just initializing this basically. All right, so this is just the plumbing to get this through, and we're going to use this in.enabled. Let's see, bool value. Like I said, we made it required. We may revisit that. I believe there's been a little bit of inconsistency there in a few different places. So we'll make sure that's good. And I'm going to go ahead and drop off some of these. I really need my Vim bindings in here to do delete line. I'm sure there's a VS Code shortcut for it also, but generate tier settings. So let's just go ahead and convert this to generate autopilot. All right. So we'll do p.autopilot and enabled, and we'll say true. And we want the cluster, once again, this is a very simple unit test here. We want the cluster autopilot to match that. Oops. Okay. There we go. I was giving it too much information, I guess. Oh, I've got the caps lock on, that's fine. All right, enabled, true, successful, nil, that's fine. Generate tier settings, and we want this to be, we'll do replace of both these, generate autopilot. And let's see, we don't care about the tier settings anymore. Let's go ahead and replace those with autopilot. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, we're 23 minutes in. I think we're doing pretty good. Where is our error? Just an extra comment here. The API doc update for autopilot is now live. Awesome. Thank you for that, William. That's super cool that y'all were working on that during this. Thanks for updating that. All right. Undefined tier settings. Okay. So we'll need to regenerate our CRDs, or our deep copy method is actually what was causing the error there. And we'll get those spit out again. Let's see if any of the examples included them as well. Under GKE. Also, shout out to Chris Cardy, who came through and was trying this out and added these really verbose examples, which are super helpful with folks being able to see the fields. So it looks like tier settings and private. Okay, we're not using either one of those. So I'll probably reuse one of these, or just this whole thing, and we'll make an autopilot demo. All right. And basically all we're going to want in here is location, and we'll do US Central 1, because that's the closest to me, I believe. Let me make sure that that actually takes a region. Let's see, location. Yeah, zone or region, cool. I guess that's just how it selects if it's zonal or regional. And then we're going to want autopilot enabled. True. And then the other things I'm going to want to do is we'll need to create a provider config ref. Or we'll use default for that, which will mean that we'll automatically use that. And let's call this autopilot cluster. The other thing I need is write connection secret to ref. So this is going to tell it where to write the kube config that it generates to. And if we get far enough along, I definitely want to actually try deploying Crossplane. Well, I'd like to try packaging all of this into a Crossplane composition that includes an autopilot cluster as well as a Helm chart. And then with one API invocation, we're just going to say create an autopilot cluster, and when it's available, deploy a Helm chart into that. So I always forget if that's the, let's see, provider config ref. One of these has, well, actually, I'll just look at the API docs. Write connection, okay, I write connection secret to ref, name and namespace, perfect. Okay, so we should be good to go on that. Name, we'll call it autocates, and namespace, we'll just put it in the default namespace. All right, so we should be able to use that. Let me make sure our cluster generation worked. Okay, that looks good. And we should see that our packaged up CRDs here, if we update here, it looks like we had a bunch of updates. Oh, it's just struggling with the cleaning the top of the CRDs. I wonder what changed about to make that happen. But anyway, that is not really a huge concern at all. But I do want to see if that actually comes back around. Interesting. All right, well, we'll need to investigate why it's happening, but it won't impact any of our operations today. So now that we've regenerated, we should see that our client is working correctly. The tests are running correctly, hopefully. And because we just put that into the generation there, we shouldn't need to do anything else, because we're just going to call generate cluster from the controller. And let's see what other stuff we have in here. Generate observation. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Late initialize spec. We could potentially want to late initialize autopilot, although it's definitely known if that's the case. Let's see if we, yeah, let's just repurpose this one. If spec.autopilot equals nil and in.autopilot equals nil, spec.autopilot equals autopilot, enabled, and there we go. Looks good. And I'm 99% certain that you can't adjust that field after the actual decision is made about the type of cluster, if it's standard or autopilot. I am 99% sure that you can't adjust that. So we can also, if we'd like, go ahead and mark that as immutable as well. All right. Let's take a quick look at the controller before we actually run it. So this is our cluster controller. So we'll essentially be connecting to the GCP API. We'll be making an observation of the cluster and checking the status and updating it. And then when we create it here, we're going to generate our cluster, and based on the spec that we've provided, we are going to create an autopilot cluster in this case. So hopefully that works out okay. If we look at this API.md, this is what I pulled earlier, and I cut that off there, from the UI. And let's actually just see. I'll pull it up and drag it over here in just a second. I want to see if the UI is now active for me, because I know I got a response on Twitter that it's going to be rolling out over the next few hours to the different regions and stuff like that. So we can see if it's actually present. So I'm just pulling that up and we'll take a look. All right. So here we go. Yep. So we already have it. So props to the GKE team and the Autopilot team, some of which are on this call, for getting that done. That was super fast. So that is really cool to see. All right. So if we go ahead and configure this Autopilot, it should be super minimal. And this is what we're actually going to be creating when we use this API type. So you'll see here, okay, yeah, so defaulting to US Central 1. And so, yeah, you really have very minimal settings here. So this should be very easily done. Yeah, earlier when I was trying to get to this UI before actually it was available, I just created one from the command line, and then I did duplication of cluster because it allows you to just copy a cluster, which is pretty slick. And then I went over to this REST, and this is what I just showed you in that markdown file. But we don't want to provision it from the UI. We want to use Crossplane. And so the first step is always getting a Kubernetes cluster. So I'm just going to use a local kind cluster. And we're going to go through the usual documentation here. Let me also pull this up, and we can just condense some of these windows here, hopefully. All right. Cluster is almost ready. And then we will go from there. And I'll pull up the Crossplane docs so we can kind of walk through how all this is going to get set up. I've already set up a service count that I'm going to use for all of this, and we'll use the 1.1 docs. Crossplane 1.1 is coming out on Tuesday, so a little less than a week from today, so folks can look forward to that. But to install Crossplane into your cluster, we just have a Helm chart here that we can use, and we'll install from the stable channel. So once again, this is a local cluster that I am just running on my local machine. William says the UI rollout went to 100% like 20 minutes ago. So we just made it. So perfect. That's cool. All right, and let's make sure that Crossplane is doing good here. All right, looks like everything is straight away. And so we're going to run the GCP controller locally. So we actually don't have to have Crossplane installed for this, since I'm going to be running it from my local machine. But some of the things we want to do later, we might want Crossplane installed for that. So I'm just going to get here again. So I'm literally just going to go run the controller after I install the CRDs. So adding all these custom resource definitions to the cluster, and I am going to be creating our new GKE cluster type, which should be up here. Looks good. And I'll run the controller up here. Crossplane, no, it's provider, main.go, and we'll run it with the debug logs on just to get a look at that. So hopefully this doesn't put too much load on my local machine here, and we'll go through the GCP install. Like I said, I've already set up a account here, so I can create a secret from my creds.json, which I showed earlier I have here. Yeah, and we will create it in the Crossplane system namespace. And the next thing we have to do is create a provider config, and I'll use the one that's in the documentation here. So we need to create our project ID environment variable for this to work here. Project ID equals Crossplane Playground. All right. And then I'll just use this echo to kube control apply here to go ahead and create that. So this is default, which means that we don't have to actually reference a provider config from the GKE cluster object. And it's going to use that secret that we pointed to. If you want to check out lots of the other ways you can provide credentials to provider-gcp's pod, you can look at our TBS episode, our bi-weekly live stream, which is arguably more formal, I guess, than this. And we looked at providing credentials with the Vault agent. All right, so we have our provider config created, and you'll see that the GCP pod, notice that up here. And so the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create our Autopilot cluster. So once again, because I didn't specify a provider config ref, it's going to use those default credentials that I just specified to point to. And I wouldn't be surprised if this fails the first time. But with all good live demo artists, we will press on regardless. All right. So it looks like successfully requested update. So hopefully it doesn't. It looks like it did this a number of times. So it could be that our cluster is unhealthy, or it didn't like something about it. So it's not ready, but it looks synced. But we do have this provisioning state. So this is looking actually quite good here. Let's see if it's tried to write our secret yet. So autocates. So it does have our kube config there, which once again is a good sign to see. And let's see if maybe it's here. It should be, since it said it's provisioning. All right, awesome. And we get the nice autopilot graphic here with the demo, and our cluster is coming up. So this is working quite well. Let's see. It does take a little bit of time. I spun one of these up earlier. I actually have a ton of questions, which maybe we'll have to have William, who's been in the chat and is the creator of this product, on one of our live streams, if William's willing, because I have so many questions about how they're handling this behind the scenes. Because really cool new product that I think a lot of people are going to take advantage of, and definitely positions GKE in a good place with the hosted Kubernetes offerings. So it'll be interesting to see if we see a lot of uptake on creating GKE clusters using Crossplane. Obviously Crossplane is open source, so we don't have numbers on who's doing what. However, I definitely see that a lot of people frequent the EKS page on .crds.dev. But I imagine with this being so easy now that a ton of folks are just going to be spinning up GKE clusters. And we'll see one way how this is so valuable in a moment here when this is finished provisioning. So let's see, we're almost at 40 minutes, and we are pretty much cruising along here. Let's check. All right, I'm going to look at let's just look at the output of it and see how our status looks. Creating. Interesting. So it should say, so I guess it doesn't say creating because the provisioning stage, but might want to actually revisit that in our controller and make sure that we're updating that appropriately. It could just be how it's interacting with the API. We can also, for folks who are doing this at home, you can also take a look at the events that are happening over here. So it is saying it's requesting an update of it. So this is something I'll want to look into and see why we're calculating a diff on it, because you'll see that's continually happening. But I don't think that we actually are performing updates here. So you'll see number of nodes 0, number of virtual CPU 0, memory 0. That's kind of the magic of this whole model here, right? And so I'm going to grab that kubeconfig, and I put this command in here. I think we called the secret autocates. Yep. So this is just a handy little command that I do to get our secret into a kubeconfig file, and then we can just run kubeconfig commands pointing at it. So let's give that a try. And I guess that I don't even know what to ask. Let's say k dash kubeconfig equals auto.cube. I was going to say get nodes, but there's not any of those. Let's see if it's let's see. Maybe it's just version. Please enter username. Oh, so we might be getting the issue with the password authentication that we've seen before with GKE. So that might be something we need to rectify. But otherwise, we can also just pull down. Let me actually just take a look at that behind the scenes and see what our kubeconfig looks like. Because we may need to see if we need to change how we're doing the authentication setup here. So let me take a look at this AutoCube, if I can find it. All right. So has a cert in it and a server, so that looks good. And let me also, I am going to get secrets autocates YAML, and I'm going to look at this also. And see what that looks like. All right, so I see kubeconfig, cluster CA endpoint. So it looks like we have our whole kubeconfig in there. So it looks like this hasn't been fully populated. So we might have to play with how we're doing the authentication here. But in the meantime, I am going to go ahead and connect to this, and let's see if we can play around with it a little bit. And let me just close out some of this. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our controller. And yeah, let's see what we have here. Okay, get pods. I assume there should be no pods running. So no resources found in default namespace. Same with nodes. So I'm going to try just creating a namespace. Let's try Crossplane system. All right. And the next thing I want to do here is let's see what happens when we install Crossplane. And like I said, we could take a look at trying to put this all into a composition as well, which would be super fun to see. And we'll just see what our time looks like for that. All right. So I wonder, that was pretty fast. So when it spins up, so these are all kind of like the default things, right? You see when you spin up a new GKE cluster. So I imagine it's just scaling all of them up at the same time, right? So as soon as my Crossplane system pods get created, it's just spinning up a new node that's configured appropriately. And I'm sure based on the let's see, kget node. So this should, I assume that we'll have a node here coming up shortly. And so I think it just, basically updates the cluster appropriately when you, let's see, when you, deploy things into it. All right. Another thing we might want to take a look at is, let's see if we have the documentation, maybe. I know I saw a link earlier. Let's see, free tier, this week's episode of Kubernetes. Yeah, pay only for the pods that you use. Here we go. This is what I want. Oh, it looks like Javad is on the stream. Javad did some work on Crossplane back in the day, and it is super awesome to see you here. I hope you're doing well, and would love to catch up. I really appreciate you tuning into the stream. All right, so this is the Autopilot overview here, and let's see if how our pods are coming along here. So they're all pending. And I'm wondering if, well, our update request should have stopped now that we have, now that we've killed that, which I'm going to go ahead and actually just delete that cluster. Let's see, it looks like it might not be an Autopilot cluster. That is a good point. Yeah, it doesn't actually have the mode here. So I'm guessing that this is not an Autopilot cluster because, right, it would have said it. So I did not notice that earlier. Good catch, William. So it looks like it created a standard mode one. So I'm wondering if this API is just not being respected at this point. Yeah, because it's asking if I want to add a node pool. Interesting. Let's go through setting one of these up anyway. Also, we could verify that it's actually sending this. It could totally be that we are not provisioning this correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up the one we have here. And we'll delete that. And Javad also mentioned that it doesn't look like it's an Autopilot cluster. So that is a good catch from y'all. I apologize for not seeing that earlier. Let's see. I'm going to create a new cluster here. And let's see if we can figure out why that would be the case. And we can put some logging in our controller to make sure that we actually do that. Let's see. So in our connect and observe, we want to make sure that we, during our observation, okay, so a good example here, well, our observation should be fine. What I want to check is when we late initialize, let's make sure that we are, did we add Autopilot here? Let's see. Yeah, William says there's a new mode column in the UI, which I noticed earlier, and we'll definitely make one of these manually if we're not able to get it to work. But yeah, that wasn't showing up right because it was a standard cluster. So let's just go ahead and make sure that everything we added. All right. So this would be exactly why it didn't work here. We didn't add the actual function to create it. So this is the beauty of a live stream, is you get to watch me make a bit of a fool of myself. But in return, I get to get some help from all of y'all. So benefit here is now we know that we need to create this autopilot as part of the generate cluster. So I was basically sending one with just the location. So we should have that caught now. And let's give this another shot. And so I'm going to go ahead and create this. And we'll install Crossplane again. Once this loads up. And I'll go ahead and get that ready to go. And we'll create our secret again here, as well as our provider config. And let's check. I'm going to need create namespace first. Crossplane system. All right. And that looks good now. And we'll create our generic secret creds. And let me make sure that the project ID is still set here. Yep, looks good. So we'll go through the same dance that we did earlier. And that's because I haven't applied these yet. Package CRDs. All right. We'll do this again. All right, provider config. And let's see if I have this recently enough. I'll just run it again. Go run command provider main go. All right, so looks good. And we are going to give this another try here now that we're actually generating this appropriately. And let's try our examples. Had a little brain freeze there. Autopilot, and we're going to give this another shot. So I wouldn't be surprised if we still have the kind of, yeah, it's constantly updating, so I'm not sure there. But hopefully this time we'll be able to see that a cluster is created successfully. So at this time it shows, oh, there we go. It just switched over to autopilot. All right, success. So we were able to do it. And so let's actually see how this spins up this time. And we can also try again here and see if this Kubernetes or this kube config actually works correctly. So where did I put that command? So I'm going to go ahead and grab this, which I wouldn't be surprised if this is not populated yet. But I'm going to check it out. Yeah, it doesn't have the endpoint present yet, so we'll need to wait for that to come through. And yeah, so it's consistently asking for an update here. So what I'm going to do is actually show what the diff is here as it's going through there. So let's see. External update if GKE is up to date. So this one has a weird one where you have to use different functions to be able to call various updates that you want to happen to the cluster. And so what I'd like to see is what the actual diff is produced. So in the client here, let's say is up to date. So yeah, we had to ignore a lot of these fields. I don't have the exact context on all of these. Let's see, check for Bootstrap node pool. Update function. Oh, right. So the Bootstrap node pool is when you create a GKE cluster by default, it gives you this option to have kind of like this initial node pool. And we actually wipe that out every time we provision one. I think Terraform has an option to choose whether to do that. But basically, if you go with that route, you're kind of opting out of our Kubernetes object model. And then you have issues where you're kind of managing some node pools with Kubernetes objects and some of them in line with the GKE cluster. It also says, William says, the moment where it flashes standard instead of autopilot is a known issue. So cool. It's cool to see they're on top of that. I'm gonna go ahead and try to get that secret again, and we'll look into this continuous update thing later on. And hopefully the kubeconfig starts to work for us here. Kubeconfig, but I'm guessing it's going to prompt us for the password again, because I think that is an unrelated issue potentially. Yeah, it's going to ask for username and password because it's using that authentication, I guess. Although, let me just go ahead and actually strip something off here behind the scenes. I'm going to see if this actually helps us out here. No. Okay, that did the same thing. We might actually have to use the authentication here. Let's see. Where is this master authentication? I think this has, let's see. Clusters before 1.12 master auth is unspecified. Username will be set to admin. Yeah. So a random password will be generated. Okay, I need to look back into how we're handling that, and we'll see why that's not working. But I do know that it works for some of these clusters, so we can dive into that a little more. All right, and it looks like our autopilot cluster is almost up and running. As usual, I am going to give us a screenshot that we can put on Twitter after this and let folks know that we are successful. So let's grab a picture of that. And I'll save that autopilot XP. All right, and this looks like it's just about ready, and then we can connect to it and see. I wonder if this has actually any information around basic authentication disabled, right? Client certificate. Let's see. I know that workload identity is enabled by default. I think I read in the announcement for all of these autopilot cluster types. So that's pretty neat. We should definitely have an episode. Actually, we've looked at IRSA, which is kind of like a similar concept for EKS. But we should definitely have an episode where we dive a little more into workload identity on GCP. So it looks like this autopilot cluster is up now. Let me just verify one more time that we're not going to be able to, yeah, it's still prompting us for the username. So I'm not sure what that issue is right now. But we'll instead just go ahead and connect to that here and see how that goes. Actually, I have an idea how we can troubleshoot something behind the scenes here. Let's see. Yeah, no resources found for the node. So I'm going to go ahead and try and install Crossplane as we did earlier. Oh, gatekeeper system. Interesting. Okay, create namespace, Crossplane system. And give me one moment here. Taking a look at another GKE config. Okay, so we do need to provide master auth, which should give us the ability to create it. And we are running up on the time that I specified here, but I really do want it to work. William says workload identity rocks. I totally agree. I'm going to give this another shot because I really want this to work. So we are going to enable basic authentication, which would not necessarily recommend, but it will be useful for this demo. So let's call this AutoCates. So we're just going to make another cluster here. And I'm copying this over from Jared's work on a composition that he composed. And we'll move this over. So this is basically, well, as the comment said here, it enables basic auth so that you can just connect directly. Like I said, would not necessarily use this in a production setting. But let's go ahead and we'll call this one AutoCube. All right. Examples, GKE and Autopilot again. Let's see. Oh, it's because I am set up to talk to the Autopilot cluster now. All right, well, actually, let's just go ahead and install Crossplane to that because I did want to take a look at how this scales up for folks that are interested in that. All right. So I wonder if this has a longer delay since it takes some time for it to. Also, let's go ahead and stop this. Yeah, so I think it's going to have a longer delay because it's actually going to spin up some nodes here. But it looks like it did work. And we see all these pending. So let's see if we can see anything happening in the console here. Well, maybe it's just better to look at the summary. All right, so here we see the CPUs and memory going up. Okay, this is pretty cool. So I'm guessing that behind the scenes it's provisioning a node for us to be able to use. Let's see here. All right. And let's see if that's coming up. All right, still pending on those. Let's see if our cluster is scaling. All right, I am going to, let's see, context, I think kind is what we want for the local. All right. So it looks like we're still coming up here. Give me one moment. All right. Use context, kind. All right, and we're back in our kind cluster here. All right, so those are running, and I'm going to start this back up. So this should, since we changed our context back to the kind cluster, let's see, auto GKE clusters do not support mutating node pools. I think what's happening here is we're trying to remove the default node pool, but it's not present because it is an autopilot cluster. And that's totally fine. But we do want to go ahead and create that second cluster. All right, so this should spin it up successfully and then error out again on that, trying to mutate. let's see, basic auth is not supported. So we might actually just have to add a workaround here for, yeah, basic auth, is not supported for autopilot clusters. All right, that's totally fine. We'll put together a composition to be able to revisit this in the future. But I'm going to go ahead and connect to this again and see if Crossplane is up and running yet. And we'll also see, all right, it looks like it's in the same spot here. So we're switching back over to the cluster. And these are still pending. So I'm not sure. We might need to enable something else in the autopilot cluster. Maybe actually, if we went to learn more here, that would be a useful thing to do. All right. Or we could try the demo. Deploying an application, scaling a workload. Let's see. Open Cloud Shell. Oh, this is just going to walk us through all of this. Create. I'm just going to see what it actually tells us to do. The autopilot cluster, microservices demo. So that looks right. Just applying it should be able to get the nodes. But it looks like we haven't scaled up here. It has one or more unschedulable pods. So this might have to do with how we had the configuration in the cluster. So I'm guessing it has to do with auto scaling. Let's see, optimize utilization, vertical pod auto scaling, node auto provisioning. Okay. So that should be working. Let's see. View details and possible actions. What it says. Increase maximum size limit for auto scaling. Interesting. So I know when you actually provision one of these from the console that you can set the auto scaling configuration in here. And we might actually just be able to edit. Well, I think that you can. Let me double back and make sure. Yeah, this is an autopilot cluster. So it looks like it is having trouble with auto scaling. Well, we were able to successfully provision one, and we'll have to circle back and see what the it's not enabled, and see what the issue is with the auto scaling here. If anyone in the chat knows why this would not be working, it's most likely user error. So I will say that much. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure why the auto scaling wouldn't be working. But anyway, so we definitely have this, in a state where it's able to provision things, and we should be able to get it ready to go relatively soon. I might open up a WIP PR with this just to show folks kind of what we accomplished here. I do want to fix this generation problem with the CRDs here, so I'll probably follow up afterwards. But yeah, I think we're about 10 minutes over time, so I appreciate folks tuning in. Would love to have someone from the Autopilot team come on TBS, our biweekly live stream show, to chat more about this and talk about some of the internals. But I definitely see this as a super useful thing for Crossplane users who want to, build compositions that provision a cluster, and then it automatically scales based on the workloads that they send to it via something like Provider Helm. But yeah, I'd love to follow it up with that. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for folks for being active in the chat. And we'll also, I should mention, Muvafik's going to join me tomorrow for TBS, and we're going to talk about how we incorporate the AWS code gen pipeline to generate all of these resources And well, William says, okay, so I was about to hop off, but William says Node should be provisioned automatically for the pods. Let's dig in. All right, I would like to dig in too. If you have any suggestions for what to do, I will stick on and keep going. But yeah, I'm not sure how to troubleshoot this from an end user perspective here. We could try. Well, okay. One thing I will try, because I don't want to just leave us hanging, especially with William here. We'll go ahead and create a. Let's see. We'll create one here. And when this one spins up, let's see. I think let's see. Yeah, kget nodes is what I'm running here. And I apologize, William. You're probably saying this 30 seconds before I run it, so it might have been after I hadn't done that yet. But yeah, I'm not sure. Let's see. Autopilot clusters should start with a couple of nodes to handle the system pods. It's unusual to see those system pods as pending. Huh, okay. So it looks like, I wonder if it's the configuration. So I wonder if maybe going through the API is causing issues with this. I think, let's see if a good way to look at this, I'll do what I did earlier. And this is very typical that I was in the middle of the sign off and we're going to keep going. But let's see if, so, it looks like this is just using the defaults anyway. So I'm not sure this is actually really telling us too much. But I do want to test it out with this one that we've spun up manually via the UI. Because it could be that some way we've configured the API is causing this to happen. So this likely will not be ready yet. Yeah, the Kubernetes API may not be available. Also interesting, name was Autopilot cluster for the first one here, which we should be getting the name with external name for folks who are familiar with the Crossplane vernacular here. Yeah, so it looks like it was not considering potentially the name of the cluster either when we spun it up. Let's see, cube control, use context, kind. I'm going to switch back up here. Oh, what is the command? Oh, config, I think. Config, use, context, kind. All right. And I want to get our GKE clusters. And let's take a look at the status of that. Once again, this isn't being reconciled. Oops. Let's see, this autopilot cluster. Interesting. So the autocates did not sync, so cannot update. But the actual name was autopilot cluster. Oh yes, the joy of managed fields. External name, autopilot cluster. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to hop back over to this example we have here. So AutoCates is the one we created, but then we ended up with this. Let me try this again. Now I'm very intrigued. K delete GKE cluster all. And it looks like successfully requested deletion. So let's see if those get cleaned up. It may take it a moment. All right, cool. So it is deleting successfully. But I'm fairly certain we created this with the name AutoCate. So I wonder if our controller did something funky there. It definitely should not be creating any resources. Successfully requested deletion. So I wonder how it actually handles. Yeah, so we have this autopilot cluster one here. Let's try again. Examples, GKE, autopilot.yaml. Interesting. Oh, okay. So this is the first one, I guess. And the AutoCates here is likely not provisioning because of the master authentication thing. So when I was looking at it earlier, yeah, let's see. Basic auth is not supported. Cool. Okay. That makes sense. All right. And let's update that, though. We should see it present. GKE and autopilot. All right, now let's see if this is working for us. All right, it looks like it is working better. All right, so our autopilot cluster is stopping, and our AutoCates is provisioning now, so that looks good. We still won't be able to connect, but that autopilot 1 is now ready. All right, so what we're going to do here is try again with one of the clusters that we created manually. And let's see on this one. Yeah, okay, so this autopilot cluster has these nodes ready. So I wonder if we did something. Oh, I know exactly what's happening. Okay. So because we clean up this default cluster, and I'm going to actually, this Bootstrap node pool. So I'm just going to totally get rid of this Bootstrap node pool here. So what we're doing is cleaning up that Bootstrap node pool. And so actually what was happening behind the scenes is Autopilot here was provisioning that Bootstrap node pool. And then we were constantly cleaning it up, which is likely why we also saw the issue with the constant update. So let's see, k config use context kind again. And let's see if this works. So that's a pretty interesting bug that we just encountered. But that is interesting because the default node pool, it kind of seemed like it was something that was, well, I don't want to say a regret in the API, but a lot of folks didn't use that, and things like Crossplane or Terraform would say, you know, do you want us to clean this up for you automatically and then use your own node pools? So that's interesting, though, because it's kind of advantageous here to have this default node pool, because like that is the default, I guess, for you know, using this autopilot. But I don't know if that was in folks' mind. I doubt it when GKE first introduced that feature. So we might have to stop cleaning that up. But this is pretty cool to see. And you'll see that we're also not requesting that constant update because that node pool should be created. So our AutoCates cluster, which once again, this is the one that we provisioned from Crossplane. And our autopilot cluster let's check this out again, actually. Make sure our autopilot cluster here is still working good. Okay, that looks good. So we'll install Crossplane into that one. So this is, once again, the manually provisioned one. And let's see how that scales up. Also, let me go ahead and end that reconciler there. Okay, create namespace, Crossplane system. All right. And I'm going to switch over here and see if we can watch this kind of in real time here scale up. Yep, so we're seeing the virtual CPUs in memory and get pods. Let's get all of them. And you'll see here that all of the pods that we were expecting are now running. Well, it looks like the Crossplane pod is still coming up. But so it's scaling up to meet the demand, right, of the Crossplane pod here, I'm guessing. And let's watch and make sure that actually comes up. So yeah, that was I'm glad we stuck on, right? Because I was ready to sign off for the night, and then we figured out what the actual issue was. And now we can fix that up, which is super cool. And once again, the way that I noticed that was that I think these, when we spun up the one manually, let's see if I can get up here. I noticed because this default pool was the same prefix that happens when you spin up a standard cluster and you don't delete the default pool. And then it kind of clicked for me. And now we can see that it is working successfully, right? It wasn't requesting updates. And it looks like this one is just about ready here. And let's connect to this one that we spun up with Crossplane. And it looks like our Crossplane pod is now running successfully in the manually provisioned one. And let's see if our Crossplane provision one is ready. It looks like it's probably still coming up here. All right, but you can see the pods are coming up. They're pending. And because we're no longer trying to actually delete that default pool, we should be good here. We can see if we get them. So they're still not coming up. It could be that I didn't disable that fast enough. I would guess, though, that it would be resilient to deleting those, so I would hope that it would come up again. But maybe if William is still in the chat, something would be interesting to see is to make sure that someone doesn't delete that default node pool, since it is kind of like opaque to seeing it. But obviously that's something on the Crossplane side, but someone could run that API request or that command just with the GCP API as well. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. But cool bug we ran into, and also seeing the cool value of using this new autopilot feature. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed. I'm super excited about it. We'll definitely get what we call a reference platform up and running to be able to make this really consumable for folks in Crossplane. And I'll make sure to put out a configuration that has a Helm chart getting deployed into this as well. And then we can have a Crossplane autopilot cluster configuration that folks can install. Yeah, I'm guessing that it wasn't resilient to the nodes coming back up. Cool. And William says they're going to follow up. And once again, William probably mentioned that in the chat quite a while ago, but I'm on a bit of a delay. So that sounds great, and happy to help out in any way possible. All right, cool. Well, this time we're actually signing off for real. I think we're about 25 minutes over, but it was super great for folks to join us. As always, we ran into some issues and worked through them, which I think is the real value of doing things live. Kind of shows that we're all human a little bit. But yeah, I really appreciate folks coming out. It looked like we had pretty good attendance in the stats I'm looking at right now. And definitely tune in tomorrow if you're interested in the AWS Code Gen pipeline. All right. Have a good one, folks.